Welcome back. This is Matt from Jaggers Brewing Co. I'm back on my shit again, and I got a SCOBY Kettle Sour. So, as I said, today's project is going to be a SCOBY Kettle Sour. I recently just kegged this, just force carbonated it, back down to PSI on it. So I'm going into this totally blind. Let's pour that beer and then we'll start talking about it. And then I'll start telling you about the inspiration for this particular beer. Here it is. So, as I said, it was just recently kegged. I force carbonated it over last day and a half. I just backed down the PSI to kind of more of a serving pressure. So this thing hasn't been in the keg for very long at all. It started off meant to be kind of more of a Berliner Weiss type of beer, and we kind of had some stuff go sideways on it, but here it is. Got a nice color to it. It definitely is cloudy. I don't know if that's going to clear up over time of it being in the keg or not. We used a SCOBY from Kombucha to be able to sour this beer. So, as I said, we ran into some issues, but let's kind of just smell it, taste it, and all that real quick to see if some of my suspicions are correct in this, and then we'll talk about it as we go along. So on the nose, you definitely pick up on the sourness. It does have a little bit of that lacto sour smell to it that, you know, most kettle sours tend to have. Smells small hints of some fruit. I'd say something along the lines of maybe almost a pineapple tropical smell. It's faint. Like I said, it's not exactly the clearest, cleanest looking beer I've ever made. So, this actually turned out a little bit better than I was fretting there for a little bit, and we'll get into that in just a second. So the sourness, the sour tartness is there. It's very subtle. I am picking up a little bit on the malt profile, which is good. Yeah, so there's a little bit of funk going on into this, which was kind of the goal of this beer. I would say not quite like the barnyard type of funk when you think of mixed culture sours, but somewhere starting along the line of there. It's not like that horse blanket or anything like that that you get from the super complicated mixed culture sours, but it definitely is almost a ping up from that normal kettle sour that you would get. has a little bit of a citrus taste to it, which I'm gonna guess is kind of a mixture between the Magnum hops and the Lacto and a little bit of the SCOBY for that matter. I've never really had a SCOBY soured beer before, so this was interesting. I don't hate it. I don't think it's as clean tasting as a Kettle Sour Berliner, for that matter. It is a good beer. So it's gonna be interesting to see how this thing starts to clean up, if it does, being in the keg in the Keezer here over time. So the let me get my notes here. So there was a fair amount of experimentation with this particular brew. So when I was filming a lot of those Berliner Wyeast brews at the very beginning of this channel, we had just started to homebrew kombucha here, and so I was interested because kombucha SCOBYs will drop the pH and kind of add that sour twang to it. And so in my head I went like, what is something that you can do to a Berliner to kind of just help elevate that sourness, you know, just add a little interesting note to it? Because Kettle Sours, they get a bad rep of being only like one-dimensional, unless you add fruit and other things to it, dry hop it or whatever the case may be. And so I wanted to do something that I felt like would be easy enough to do. And the way that kombucha SCOBYs work is over time they kind of start to throw off another SCOBY. And so you can take part of that SCOBY, you can put it in a new batch, and then suddenly you can have 2 batches going, 3 batches, etc., etc. Well, before you know it, you end up having quite a few of these things and you don't know what to do with them. You can throw them to chickens and stuff like that. There's plenty of things to do, or give them away for other people to start to do their own kombuchas. So the SCOBY in and itself is it's a symbiotic type of yeast culture that has bacteria in it as well. And it's naturally souring in and itself. Additionally, there's benefits to using the SCOBYs for teas. It kind of like helps throw in some antioxidants and just other things. And I wasn't shooting to do that in this particular brew. I just wanted to see if we could achieve a drop in pH that was significant enough to be like a Kettle Sour, and also be able to elevate that taste that we would normally pick up from a lacto strain. So let's see here. This particular SCOBY came from a regrowth of a little piece of SCOBY that was in a bottle when we bottled our kombucha. After a little bit, we neglected a batch of kombucha, and I was really hesitant to reuse that SCOBY. The airlock went dry, and I was just like, look, I don't know, I feel like that this thing has been compromised. And so we went and got a bottle of the kombucha in the refrigerator, popped it open, drunk it, and it had a little bitty SCOBY in it. So we nursed that thing to a full-grown SCOBY, put it in some tea, and let it go. Now, that is kind of the, you know, short explanation of where this particular SCOBY came from. There's a little bit more going on with that, and so that's a whole different story for a different day. But it is to note that, you know, you kind of almost don't know exactly what's going to be in this particular colony, essentially. The next part of the experiment was, if you go back and you looked at the last batch of Berliners that I did, I took the very first German ale yeast culture and I repitched on it 2 other times. So by that point in time, there was 3 generations of yeast that had fermented Berliners. So I was like, well, I still got that, and so I wanted to see if I could get a 4th run out of it. As you can see, I did. So that was totally cool. I stretched that thing out 4 generations. I don't necessarily taste any off flavors, but I think that's gonna be hard to do. Looking for off flavors and something that's sour, like you wouldn't be able to pick up any kind of bacteria infection that you would have picked up. Now, to note, as far as infections and stuff go, when getting back to when I put the SCOBY and put it in the wort, it took a really long time for it to kind of start to sour and get going. And so we had a stall at about 4 pH. And so we dropped down from, what was it, 5. So we dropped down, our target beginning pH for the mash was 5.3 pH. And our target, I was wanting to really target 3.2. For some reason, I feel like that's gonna be the next version of Berliner for myself is I want to try one at 3.2 instead of the 3.4 that they've been coming in at. So I wrote down that my targets were anywhere between 3.4 and 3.2. So we stalled at 4.0. And I got really worried. It hung out at 4.0 for a while. And I popped the top on the kettle in the like heated fermentation and kettle souring contraption that I have. And there was a little bit of a pellicle going on. So to me that indicates that there's probably more than just lacto souring this kombucha SCOBY. And but it stalled out at 4.0, so I kind of got worried, and it looked like there were a little bit signs of fermentation, and I was like, I've really got to get this thing down in pH. I've got to knock out kind of some of what's going on here, and I gotta get this down quickly. Luckily, I had a second pitch of lacto that I had taken off of a previous Kettle sour, and it was the second one in that before mentioned series. And that thing, in my previous experience, it had dropped pH in a 5.4 pH wort all the way down to 3.4 in 8 hours. And so we were sitting there at 4, and I was like, gotta bring out the special tool here. So I did that, and like within a few hours we had reached 3.4, and I was like, I have to get this thing going. So I went ahead and called it at 3.4 instead of the initial 3.2, and just kind of carried on the rest of the second boil, adding the hops and then Whirlfloc Tablet, the Yeast Nutrient, all that. And kind of coming back to the clarity of the beer, I mean, it's kind of still cloudy. So, you know, mentioning the Whirlfloc Tablet kind of brought that to my mind. So once we got that second bowl off, I no-chilled like I normally do. And previously, a few days before I kind of kicked this project off, I went ahead, and because the yeast was older, at this point it's probably almost nearly a year old since I used it last, I went ahead and built up a starter, and I basically just took that mason jar that I had, swirled it up really well, and I poured about half of that mason jar into a flask, and then I added 1 can of the proper pitch, 1 bottle of water, and then a dash of yeast nutrient to kind of just help get that yeast going for a really good pitch on this beer. The recipe development for this was really meant to be a Berliner Weisse, and so with using the Kombucha SCOBY and it kind of just having that funk, and then having to go back and using the other lacto, I mean, I don't know if it's really necessarily within style for that. Like I said, it tastes good. It's kind of muted. I'm just gonna call it just a kombucha kettle sour instead. But we used the same percentages and more or less the same malts that we used during the fixed it recipe for the Berliner Weisse. And I just so happened to have some TEXMALT malts left over from when they donated some grains to the channel, and so I used them on this. So thank you, TEXMALT, for that addition. And that was 50% of the Denton County wheat and 50% of the Llano Pilsner malt. For the water profile, we shot for the yellow balanced, like we have been before for the other kettle sours and Berliners that we've done thus far. pH drop was mostly handled by that SCOBY. After it stalled out at 4.0, we used that 2nd generation of lacto. The IBUs for this was handled by 5.1 IBUs of Magnum at 15 minutes, along with that Whirlfloc Tablet, and then Yeast Nutrient at the 10, no chill, and then pitch yeast. So that's basically the biggest part of the notes here. Now that this thing's had a little bit of time to warm up, still smelling a little bit of the hint of sourness there. Kind of the tropical pineapple still. Now it's warmed up a little bit, it tastes a little bit more funky than what it did beforehand. Maybe a little bit more fruity. A little pineapple-y, a little citrusy, orangey. Kind of almost has a sweet tartness, like at the end, kind of like that, like a peach, like you would experience with a peach. All in all, still not bad. Looks like it's starting to clear up a little bit, so maybe some of that was chill haze, or maybe it's just we're getting a little closer to the bottom of the glass. So interesting kind of comparisons here. This right here is the SCOBY that I used to sour. And if you look right here, that little split, that's one of those like little separations that I was talking about, where you would gain another SCOBY to be able to use in teas and things like that. Once I got this SCOBY pulled out of the wort, I immediately put it in a mason jar, and I put some tea in it to kind of just help it rebuild, more or less rinse all that wort and and things on it to kind of just have it in storage. This thing's sat on the kitchen counter at room temperature. Has been there for about 2 weeks now. So that's where that's at. But this is the tea that it was in. And so I just put it in this tea today. And so as you can see, there is a good color difference between the two teas. Now, while we're looking at this, we've got a little bit of gunk down there. And this thing hasn't been through actual fermentation to create alcohol. So I didn't put this in with any yeast here in a controlled environment or anything like that. So any fermentation that took place in that kettle was all on its own. Having some yeast in its colony, I suspect that there was some alcohol when I went into the second boil. I'm sure all that alcohol got burnt off. I noticed that I was like literally about, you know, 3-4 points low on my starting gravity. So that is an indication that there was some possible fermentation that happened. Now I'm only comparing that to previous batches of the blender that have all consecutively came in at the same starting and finishing gravities. Now this thing got a little bit lower than the other ones did, but the other ones normally start off a little bit higher. So instead of the typical about 4% ABV that this one had, or this one would have been if I would have used the other methods that I've used before, this one came in just a little bit lower than the norm, which I mean honestly is okay. You know, there's nothing wrong with that at all. So I've got a ton more questions and ideas for the SCOBY. When I saw this gunk in the bottom down here this morning when I changed the tea over for the storage here, I got a couple ideas that came up. So before we leave, if you've ever tried this experiment before, please let me know. I'm interested in what anybody else's experience has been thus far doing something like this. Also, before we go, if you've got any ideas or cool things that you want to see the SCOBY and possibly this gunk go through, let me know in the comments down. I think that I've got a few ideas. I'll just maybe see what how soon that I can work those in. I've got a few other like sour brews coming up, so it might be interesting to maybe do some mixing, some matching, some co-pitching aspects to this. But other than that, thank you guys so much for coming along. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe. We're getting there. It's, you know, been a fun ride so far. Thank you for hanging out, and cheers, y'all. Welcome back. I'm Matt from Jaggers Brewing Co. and I'm on my shit again. Welcome back. This is Matt from Jaggers Brewing Co. Today's project is going to be a SCOBY sour. Welcome back. I'm Matt from Jaggers Brewing Co. Today's project is a... Welcome back. This is Matt from Jaggers Brewing Co. Today's project is going to be a Kettle sour, soured with a Kombucha SCOBY. Welcome back. I'm Matt from Jaggers Brewing Co. Today's project is going to be a SCOBY sour because I'm back on that shit again. Do have a little bit of the malt profile tasting there.